We are here as good students, well-behaved and good speaking. So let's begin tonight with prayer. Dear God, we give you thanks that we can join together over this medium, no matter where we are. God, thank you for each one who's here and for those who will be listening during the course of the week. Guide our study, guide our words, guide our hearts. Let us grow in our faith as we learn from you. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. So come over this way, else I don't have to lean so much. There. Here we are. So we are tonight in chapter 5. So let's see. We learned about Cain and Abel.
Of Genesis, right?
We're in Genesis. Yeah, Genesis. That's in the Bible. First book. Last week, we learned about Cain. We learned the story of Cain and Abel. And then we went into verses 17 through 26, which was the genealogy of Cain. And we are going to continue with this genealogy. But now that brings us back to the point of what are the different sources? I've talked about this. I wanted to get that into your head. So what are the different sources? Somebody other than Carol who has it written down.
Yahweh,
Yahweh, which is what letter?
J,
J. The J source is Yahweh.
I know the E, I don't know how to pronounce it.
Elohim.
Elohim.
It's the Lord, which is the Lord. Okay.
And the P was priestly.
Or prophetic, didn't you use that word too?
No, it's priestly.
Okay, I thought you said,
I think she did. Yeah, see, at one point she said prophetic, yeah.
Definitely
But
the priestly line, and that was my mistake if I said prophets, it's priestly.
that's all right, that's all right. She
There's
forgot.
one more.
And I don't remember that one. So
Okay, Carol, go ahead.
Deuteronomy,
The Deuteronomy, yes, that's the D source. So in Genesis so far, we have had the J source and the P source.
Okay.
So when we read the genealogies for the first part of chapter 4, the second part of chapter 4, 17 through 26, that is the J source. And it's kind of giving this overview and helping us, if we remember, we talked about that it talks about the human, the source of arts. We have the forgers of bronze and iron. We have the one who played the lyre and the pipe. We have the one who designed cities. It's just telling the beginnings of art, the beginnings of the human race. But it doesn't tell us a whole lot, except the only one we have much about is this Lamech, who said, I've slain a man for wounding me, a young man for striking me. He was a pretty violent guy. That's the only one we have much. But at the very end of that part, what's the last part of that section? Which is going to lead us into today a little bit.
didn't hear that.
we can't hear you.
Oh, okay, I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay, we have the source that leads us in today. So what's the last verse talking about? Maybe the last verse or two of like 4, 25, and 26.
Birth of Seth.
The birth of Seth. So we didn't talk about this last week, but what is the significance of the birth of Seth?
Genealogy of Jesus is traced back through Seth.
All right.
Right.
Yeah. And did Adam and Eve have other children after that?
I don't know.
we assume so.
Yeah, there were lots of other children born. It says actually Cain and Abel. But there's a bigger significance to the birth of Seth. So what happened to the firstborn sons of Adam and Eve?
He was killed.
Okay, Abel was killed.
Abel was killed.
So Abel was killed, he's gone. And what about Cain?
Cain was sent out to wander.
Okay, he was kicked out of the family. So that was the end. But now God's saying, okay, I'm the God of mercy and grace, and I'm going to reboot. And here you go, you got another shot at it. So here comes Seth. Seth is born, and now we have an heir, we have someone to carry on the name, a reboot. Because the rest of Genesis, there's an awful lot of that, oops, and then reboot. So here's the first time we have the first reboot. Seth is born. All right, now let's go down to starting with chapter 5. And we're going to read until it says that Adam died. So if someone would like to read that.
Who's brave? There's a lot of names in there.
Oh, just until Adam died. The next one.
Oh. Oh, so
From
verse 5, okay.
when to when?
5,
Chapter 5, 1 through 5. I don't have.
1 through 5, okay.
Verse
This
markings
is
in
the
there.
written account of the descendants of Adam. When God created human beings, he made them to be like himself. He created them male and female, and he blessed them and called them human. When Adam was 130 years old, he became the father of a son who was just like him in his very image. He named his son Seth after the birth of Seth, Adam lived another 800 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Adam lived 930 years, and then he died.
How long was 930 years ago? What date would it be?
a math question?
A math question.
Just a minute, let me get my calculator.
2022 minus 930 years.
1092. Did I do that right?
Wanted to point that out, something like that, yeah. Okay, so 1092, what was happening in the world in 1092?
Isn't that Charlemagne or? Thought he was,
It's in the Dark Ages, I think that's close
Yeah.
enough. I think we're in the Crusades.
Yeah.
Could you imagine any person living from that time until this time?
Wow.
That's a long time. So here's
If
the
their
question.
years are the same as our years.
Well, here's the question then. Is that a literal year? Is that a story? What is that number?
say it one more time because you are still
Okay, I
loud sometimes and soft and
okay. What that number, 930 years, is that a real number, scientific number? Adam lived 930 years and he was 130 years old when he had his third son. Are those actual years or are they some kind of literary something else?
well, you know what? I often say, well, 100 years ago when I was in first grade, you know, so I'm thinking, although they're pretty specific, that's what makes me wonder if somebody didn't really keep track of them as opposed to just a long time, you know.
When I was a kid, we came up with all sorts of ways that we could have a number that would be maybe every time there was a full moon, they called it a year, or maybe there, you know, all sorts of different ways because we believed that it couldn't possibly be real. So we came up with a whole bunch of different ways that it could possibly be that number, and but not 365 days.
Yeah. Well, that calendar didn't exist then anyway, did it?
Okay,
Our calendar?
there's a couple things. If we look at it and we take it literally, that means that human beings didn't appear on Earth until about 6,000 years ago. Period. And anybody who's got a science background, what do you think about that? Saying that human beings didn't appear on the Earth until 6,000 years ago.
There's certain denominations or people that they're Christians say that the earth in the beginning was only 5,000 or 10,000 years ago. But I don't know which denominations or churches, but there's people that's what they believe, they can only trace it back, I think, biblically based on that for 10,000 or 5,000 years. So that's what they say. You know?
Okay, so what do you believe about it, Dan?
What do I believe?
Mhm.
I think it goes back farther than that. I accept a lot of science. I mean, they say the universe was created 14 billion years ago, and our universe was 4 billion years ago. So I think it's longer than 5,000 or 10,000 years.
Okay, so here we come to a problem. I'm going to read the Bible literally. Now remember, we've already talked about those first two chapters, that it's not a science journal.
Mhm.
And I think we pretty clearly proved that with the two different stories in chapter 1 and chapter 2, that you can't take it just as this scientific book on how the earth was created, because it would contradict itself. So it's a story as to why and about the relationship of God rather than scientific, because it wasn't written by a scientific people. So let's take this into this chapter. The culture that wrote this down, I mean, it was these stories passed through generation to generation, verbal stories, and then someone wrote it down. Were they the same scientific, numerical, mathematical culture that we are?
I don't think so.
No.
No.
When was Genesis written down, recorded? Do we know when it was?
I know the answer, but I don't. I will get an answer for that. It's not the oldest book written down. I think I told you what the oldest book written down, experts think. What was it, Carol?
Job?
Job. They think Job was the oldest actual manuscript. So Genesis was written sometime after that. And it wasn't, Moses didn't sit down one day and write the first 4 books of the Bible, the 5 books, the Pentateuch. Moses didn't do that. We can see it's written by these different ones. I'll have to get a time frame. I'm sure it was written over a period of time when Genesis was. But the people that wrote it down, or the stories that were passed on, not from a scientific nation and mathematical computer. So let me give you an example of how we interpret things differently. So let me think of a word that has changed its meaning significantly in our lifetime.
It's a lot of them.
Well, I'll think of one specific one. I'll say a statement. He was a very gay young man.
Yeah, that's the word I was thinking.
Okay, if you're over 80 for sure, what would that mean when you were a child?
Happy.
Happy.
Happy, cheerful.
It was a gay time.
Don, we now are gay apparel.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
I mean, that statement, Don, we now are gay apparel. Think about how that has changed.
Right.
If you're under 40, you're going to just snicker hysterically because you're donning your gay apparel. But what does it mean? So just that one example shows you how we interpret things differently. And let me try to get, here's another example. All right, so we watch TV. And I was talking to my sister today, talking to her about the antenna that I have, because I live close to Buffalo. And we get channels 2 and 4 for free. And she says, and if you talk to somebody under 30, they'll say, is that legal? Because they have no concept, because every TV service, they don't understand this whole thing about this antenna that you can have. But that's what we grew up with.
I still have one. That's
I
what I
have
have.
one. It sure looks a lot different than the rabbit ears I had. But I mean, then that's in our lifetime.
Yeah.
That's within 50 years that these things have changed completely.
Mhm.
So think about, so we go back to this culture and we're reading this through the parameters of our today's culture, saying, well, he lived 930 years. Whew, that was a long time. But that culture, there's an interesting thing in this commentary, says this may have been, instead of a numerical value, there's two possibilities. Number one is it came from the other cultures at the time, the Mesopotamian culture, where they had these kings that lived 140,000 years, which they didn't. But it was saying their great reign, and so Genesis, that was written at the same time as these Mesopotamian tales were on, we're going, well, these people aren't gods. And they don't live that long. They live a number of years, but then they die because they're humans and they're not God. So that's number one for these lengths of time. It was much less than the Mesopotamian kings. And the other one, and this is really, I may have to read this to you. Let me find it. That it might have been more about numerology and the significance of the numbers instead of the actual, I jumped too far ahead. And so instead of the actual numbers, more about numerology. And all of the numbers, I'm still looking for it. This is all of the numbers ended with a certain number. So they either ended in 9 or I didn't underline it, darn it. And anyways, that these numbers may have been a system of numerology talking about significance rather than actual years. And to me, that makes more sense than people were living 900 years. And I've read, of course, a thing on one from the Literalist that said, well, the air was completely clean. There was no pollution. There was no viruses. There was this mist around the earth that protected from radiation. So all of those things contributed that they could actually live that much longer. But I still find it hard to believe that someone lived 930 years. So does that make sense at all to you? What do you think about this? I'm going to let you discuss a minute. I'm going to try to find that place, what I wanted. What do you think?
The numerology or whatever you said makes sense to me. I mean, that like makes logical sense to me.
Well, the fact that one of them lived 130 years and another one lived 930 years.
No, that's when he was 130. He had
Oh.
another son.
Oh, okay.
He's the same one.
Oh, okay.
I mean,
Oh, when Seth had lived 105 years, yeah.
I just take it as being that Adam and these other people, lived a good full long life, but it doesn't matter if they live to be 80 or 800. It's what happened is what's important now.
They just lived a very long time.
I mean, when at the very beginning of Genesis, it talks about the creation of the earth and it's, over several days. I don't even think about the day as being a day. It's got to be, days are millions and millions of years. If you go back to science, which I don't think there's a conflict. It's just somebody's way of saying, this thing happened first. So let's say that was the first day. They could have said it was the first year or the first month or whatever. And then the next thing happened. The next thing happened. So, and it's like a folk tale. It was passed down, and it made the story more interesting. Maybe to think that somebody lived that many years.
It's not.
Right.
I just don't think it's a conflict. When we look at the whole part of Genesis, the whole first 11 chapters, there's just things that don't make sense to our scientific view of looking at it. But when you look at it as the relationship with God and how these people live, it just makes it all falls into place much easier. Not that I said, but not that it's untrue. It's just, we can't look at things the way that the culture who wrote this down does. Just like if we go to another culture in this country and you're sitting someplace and something happens and everybody around you starts laughing and it's not because of language, it's just because, and you have absolutely no idea what they're laughing at. Because culturally, they see something funny that we don't. And I talk about that being in Haiti. Like, and Sue will tell you about this too. When we interviewed kids after the earthquake, they had that devastating earthquake in 2010. And the kids are standing there and they'll say, and my house fell down and everybody in my family was killed. Right? You saw that. So they would tell you these horrendous stories and they would sit there and be laughing. And I don't understand it to this day, but that was part of the culture. And that happened with everyone who told it. I can't understand it. There's Dottie's phone. She won't be able to get back on. So maybe we'll wait a second till she tells them she's in Bible study.
Hello?
Whoever told these stories or created these stories and passed them on, their knowledge of the world was so limited to such a small spot, and so you could say some of these things don't make sense if you think time wise or scientific wise, but it's interesting that some of it seems so factual. I mean, I'm old, but when I was probably in 7th grade, we learned that the cradle of civilization was the Tigris-Euphrates area of the world. And that's what came out in the story. So for those people, that's geographically the area they were from. And they go back and say, well, that's where the first people were and the first cities or whatever were there. And that's all they knew. They didn't know that maybe there was other creations going on in Africa or somewhere else in the world. But they told the story based on their limited knowledge. And it's some of it's actually scientifically pretty correct.
Mm-hmm. And
They talk about life basically was created in water in the seas, and then it came onto land. So that's what's in Genesis. They basically talk about so there's a lot of things scientifically that are correct, and there's a lot of things that don't make a lot of sense, but for them it did, for a good story.
It's the story. It's the story of the genealogy. It's whatever numerology, we don't know, but they all. Oh, I can't even find it. I know I read it, but it said virtually all the numbers that are listed as we read through the rest of it are based on the number 60. 60, it was the magic number of the time. So either based on 60 or 5 years. How many months are in 5 years?
60.
60 months, so it can be so it can be either a multiple of 60 or with the 5 years in there, or with the number 7, which was the magic number of the day with the creation. So if you look at all these numbers, you'll see how they almost without fail, you can see how they fit into this 60. Like, so Adam lived, let's see, Seth, the days after Adam, he became the father of Seth, were 800 years. Well, somehow it was 180. I wish I could find a place, but anyways, they talked about that. And if I find a place, I will read it, or I'll tell it to you next time. Find it, because I can't find where I read it. But so that to me makes a lot of sense about what happened. And there's these numbers and why these numbers are so high. And then when we get to people like Abraham, we start to get in more realistic numbers and ages. Like, anybody know how old Moses was? 120.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
Now, is that possible? Yeah.
Yeah, people have lived that.
So from the time we have Moses, now we have a more accurate record. These aren't just people from way ancient. They could have actual records of these. And so now we start getting into the realistic numbers, and maybe there really were records. And now they're talking about numbers, not just these ancient people of unknown origin that are in the history. Because remember, according to this, the whole world was wiped out when we get to the next chapter with Noah. So, you know, floods ruin a lot of records too. So, but that's the explanation, and I like that. So let's go and let's finish reading the rest of chapter 5. So we start with verse, and these have some names in them, and you can just kind of, I want you to pick out, there's 2 names in particular. I want you to, when we get to Methuselah and Enosh. Enoch, I think, well, yes, Enoch and Methuselah. Pay attention to those. So if someone wants to read from verse 6 and then read as far as you want, and someone else will take over.
I'll start. When Seth had lived 105 years, he became the father of Enosh. And after he became the father of Enosh, Seth lived 807 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Seth lived 912 years, and then he died. When Enosh had lived 90 years, he became the father of Kenan. And after he became the father of Kenan, Enosh lived 815 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Enosh lived 905 years, and then he died. When Kenan had lived 70 years, he became the father of Mahalalel. And after he became the father of Mahalalel, Kenan lived 840 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Kenan lived 910 years, and then he died. When Mahalalel had lived 65 years, he became the father of Jared. And after he became the father of Jared, Mahalalel lived 830 years and had other sons and daughters. If you're not the firstborn, you don't even get your name in here. Altogether, Mahalalel lived 895 years, and then he died. When Jared had lived 162 years, he became the father of Enoch. And after he became the father of Enoch, Jared lived 800 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Jared lived 962 years, and then he died. When Enoch had lived 65 years, he became the father of Methuselah. And after he became the father of Methuselah, Enoch walked with God 300 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Enoch lived 365 years. Enoch walked with God, then he had no more. Then he was no more because God took him away. When Methuselah had lived 187 years, he became the father of Lamech. And after he became the father of Lamech, Methuselah lived 782 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Methuselah lived 969 years and then he died. When Lamech had lived 182 years, he had a son. He named him Noah and said, he will comfort us in the labor and painful toil of our hands caused by the ground the Lord has cursed. After Noah was born, Lamech lived 595 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Lamech lived 777 years, and then he died. After Noah was 500 years old, he became the father of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. The end.
Yay.
Thank you.
Good job.
Um,
I decided I want to write a Christmas carol about Mahalalel.
La 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 la.
I was just thinking, if you're trying to call your kid in for supper, la 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 la,
He goes, no, 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 no.
Mahalalel. Mahalalel.
La, la, la. Oh, now you're just being silly.
All right, so all of these years, I mean, the youngest one there was 800 and some. Who's the oldest one?
Methuselah.
Yep.
Methuselah lived 900 years. 900.
987.
900, no, 69. 969. And now what happened to all of these guys?
He died.
died. And then he died. And then he died.
Except
No, Enoch
Enoch.
didn't.
Yeah, Enoch,
Enoch
God
didn't.
took him away. Oh, Dottie, go ahead.
Enoch didn't die. He
Right.
walked with God and he was not.
So let's go
But
back.
God took him.
Yep, God took him. And look at, he was only, how old was he? He was only 365 years. Just a mere child.
365.
Yeah, 365. So he was, this is a great mystery. And if you watch a lot of science fiction, there was this show when I was a kid called Land of the Lost. Any of you remember that? Yeah, there we go. Mary must be, yeah. Okay. And who was the wise Sleestak?
I can't say as I remember it that well, but I know the name.
Sleestaks, they were the bad guys. And there was one that was really good, and his name was Enoch. Why do I remember that? I have no idea. But you'll see in a lot of science fiction, there'll be somebody that comes back and often their name is Enoch. And that comes from this story, that Enoch never died. So this is part going back to this Mesopotamian one that's possibly comparing them to the great kings that lived these 100,000 years. And these are mere human beings. They live a long time, but then they die. Oh, except for one. He escaped, so just to let you know that there's a possibility that we don't all have to die. Just kind of this whole story going, what happened to him? Don't know. But that's a great mystery as to why that's there, but it could have been from these other tales that were traveling around at the time. When we get into Noah, we're going to find for sure that, and this is just a little spoiler alert, that there was a tale going. Anybody ever heard of Gilgamesh?
Gilgamesh?
Gilgamesh, yeah.
Gilgamesh.
Gilgamesh. I'll get it right. But we're going to find out about him and the story of the great flood through the Mesopotamian. So that's going to be an interesting story. And you'll begin to see why I refer to these other cultures at the time when we get into these other stories. All right, we've got all these guys living this long time. And who's the last one on the list? Not the last one to be born, because we have Shem, Ham, and Japheth, but who's the last father in the list?
Lamech?
No, the last father,
Noah.
Oh, Noah.
Noah. Because we have Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Who, have you ever heard of Noah before? Yeah, we've all heard of
Come
Noah.
in.
Noah has Major Street?
Yeah,
Okay.
Did you wash clothes?
I'm having Bible study.
You're walking in.
Did you wash clothes?
I love her. I
Oh,
just
yeah,
love
I
her.
did.
I took them out of the washer already. Do you want me to put them in the dryer for you?
Yeah. I'll give you-
Okay, no, sit down, do your Bible study. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
I forgot all
What
about it.
are you studying on?
I'm doing it online with Molly.
Oh, watch it now. I'll take care of your laundry. You go do your Bible,
Okay.
okay?
Good.
Thank you.
Let her in Bible study.
I want that person to come to my house too.
Okay. All right.
Put the wash in, I forgot.
That's a good excuse to get somebody else to do it for you, Dottie. Good job. All right, so I want you to look at, we have Noah. And he's the only one that they talked about his reason for birth. We got out of the narrative. He was so old, he had a son, he had more sons and daughters, and lived another total year. It's all the same, except for Enoch, which is that little blip there, and then Noah. And what was Noah? What did his father say about him when Noah was born?
He will comfort us in the labor and painful toil of our hands caused by the ground the Lord has cursed.
Okay, are we here reminded right now of the curse and the sin of man? Why would we be reminded of this curse and sin of man right here? This is number, tell me what verse that is.
That's who we-
29.
29.
Right here, yeah, 29. Why would that be right there?
Well, God is
'Cause it-
about to destroy the earth. No, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mary.
I wasn't gonna say something appropriate. I was gonna say, because it didn't fit in up above.
What?
I was gonna say, because it didn't fit in up above.
Okay, so we'll go back to Carol. Okay. God is getting ready. In the next chapter, we've got Noah, and we know what's going to happen. We're going to have the flood. Everybody's going to be wiped out. And Noah is going to be the one that brings the relief from this great sinful curse. So they're getting ready for the story. You're sitting around, we go back, sitting around the campfire. And Noah was going to be the one to bring relief for all of this. And tomorrow we'll tell you what he did. Go to bed.
I want you to keep talking about that campfire because it really warms me up freezing when you talk about that.
Okay, so can you see why this whole thing is brought up again? Because he's going to bring us relief from the toil that we've received from being sinful people. Aha, good job, Noah. It's all set up. I just, if you just listen to this, and if you listen to even the cadence of this genealogy, can't you see it being sung in a story? And you can just hear the oral tradition going on. You can just hear it as it's there. So to try to make this some scientific treatise on the beginning of the world just takes away from the beauty that it was intended to be. The story of us, the story of our beginnings, the story of our sin, the story of God's mercy that keeps rebooting whenever we really do awful things. It just makes more and more sense as you study it and see it and goes, oh, any light bulbs going off for any of you?
The light bulbs aren't going off because we couldn't hear that statement, but that's okay.
It was such a good statement.
You are fading in and out. So
I'm sorry.
when you see us go like that, that means We
Okay,
can't hear you. And then we sit back. Okay, there she is. All right, there she is.
okay, all right. So I said, did you hear me talk about the cadence of the genealogy?
Yeah.
And as you sit and you listen to it, it's the story of us. It's the story of our relationship with God. So as you sit there, and if you listen to it as a scientific treatise on how the creation was, you miss the beauty of what this is intended to be. It's intended to show us how God is merciful and how God gives us these chances to reboot whenever we do anything wrong, whenever we as human beings are being awful. God says, okay, I'm going to give you a chance to reboot. It shows the God of mercy, God of justice, but also the God of mercy. Okay, did you get that?
Got it.
Now, did any light bulbs coming off, anything comment on that?
If we get so caught up in the scientific 910 years or 895 years or whatever, we do miss, I mean, haven't thought about that as being a cadence. You know, they say the same thing basically about each person. And it's kind of, you know, usually genealogies are, okay, so I got it, you know, this one begat that one, you know, but it is, there is a beauty in that you miss if you're looking at it, trying to prove it. Does it make sense? Trying to prove the years anyway.
Yeah, so and isn't it almost exactly the same story from the beginning of chapter 5, for chapter 5, isn't it almost exactly the same story as from Genesis chapter 4, verses 17 through 26? They're both genealogies from different perspectives. We got the genealogy of Cain, then we have the genealogy of Seth, but they're told in very different ways. So we know they had to come from different sources. So there's one person I want you to look at both of those chapters, the end of chapter 4, Lamech, Lamech. Are they the same person?
I don't think so. You ask if they're the
Yeah.
same person?
Mhm.
I don't think so, because that was before Seth was born.
No, because that's the descendants of Cain. Chapter 4, 17 through 26.
Right,
The
right.
descendants of Cain.
Well, I'm just making that assumption because that's where it showed up
It's
in
not
the verses.
because Seth was also a child of Adam.
Right,
Seth could have been born at any time. But all of these people, there were 6 or 7 generations from Cain. But that's Cain's, the generations of Cain.
okay. All right, you're right.
I'll mark that down.
Yeah.
Then there's these different genealogies from different sources about what's important. So there's 2 Lamechs. The first Lamech was this really vicious guy. He was terrible. But then the other Lamech, same name, but he was the father of Noah, and we don't get anything vicious from him. He just was the one that was the father of Noah, who pronounced that Noah was going to give them relief from their sin.
So they're not the same person.
No.
So I was right.
You're right. You were down there.
Not
You're
for the
logical.
right reason, but I was right. Just say, Mary,
Your logic was wrong.
Mhm.
all right, fine.
I was with you though.
Okay. So there they are. And now we're gonna stop because the next chapter, let's go the first 4 verses of the next chapter. Because this is the weirdest place, and I think the whole Bible. I think this is the strangest passage. Chapter 6, verses 1 through 4.
Oh, I'll read that. If it's strange, I'll read that.
Okay. Nephilim is the name.
But, oh, I'm going through 4. Oh, I wouldn't have volunteered, but I thought we were stopping at 4 before.
Chapter 6 in Genesis, verses 1 through 4.
Got it. When human beings began to increase in number on the earth and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful and they married any of them they chose. Then the Lord said, my spirit will not contend with humans forever, for they are mortal. Their days will be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown. Oh, explain that one, Molly.
I think this is a good one for you to, well, what do you think about that?
Are you giving us homework? Are we supposed to figure this out?
Just saying, this is, I really believe this is for me, this is the oddest chapter story of the whole Bible. It's obviously a little snippet of a story that we have. As we said, these came from different oral traditions. And here's this little piece that's there. So what's this about?
We were all ears.
Anybody have any thoughts?
Honestly, that's bizarre.
Is polygamy, can you have more than one wife?
Well, polygamy is more than one wife, but we have the sons of God came into the daughters of men. Does that sound familiar? If we took it out of the Bible, can you think of any other place that would sound familiar?
With mythology and I don't know.
Well, go ahead, Nancy, follow your thought there.
The thought stopped right there.
All right, let me give you a name. Hercules. Okay, Mary, you're shaking your head. You know, give me what you know about Hercules.
Well, I'm just thinking like the gods are, you know, the Hercules and I can't, I'm drawing a blank on the other gods' names, but you know, Hercules was,
wasn't a god. Hercules wasn't a god. Hercules was a demigod. Demigod. Anybody know what that is?
Half God, half man.
Bingo.
Okay.
What do
Well,
we
I know
call-
Demi and I know God.
Yeah. So these were one of the gods. I get the Greeks and Roman gods mixed up. So excuse me, but you have Zeus and you have Apollo and you have, I think I'm doing Greek right now.
yes,
Wish David were here. He knows more of these. And when the gods came down and slept with women, they produced these demigods that
okay.
had these super strengths, like Hercules. And there was quite a few of them. And that's part of the mythology of the Greek and the Roman culture, and these other cultures, they had these stories going around. And this definitely fits right in with the stories of previous times, other cultures at that time.
Previous what?
Other previous cultures, other cultures that were in existence. So this is going to be the homework for today, because this is a hard passage. And I want you all to do some research and see what you can find out, what people say about this passage, about the sons of God, because we only have one God. what do we do? Where did this come from? What were these mighty men of old that were men of renown? So look up whatever sources you can find, because I'm not going to take the sole responsibility with trying to figure this one out. But this is tough. This is a tough one.
But that's why you get the big bucks, Molly.
I'm with the big bucks, so now I am teaching you. But I am a teacher, and the best teachers give assignments. And maybe I already know the answers. I just want to see if you can find them.
Isn't she cute?
Yeah, right.
Can you like phrase your homework assignment again, please?
Okay. Um, Who were the Nephilim? Nephilim. So everything you can research on the Nephilim,
Okay.
okay, I think that will help. And it'd be interesting. So there's that.
Y'all are not joining me in leaning forward when we
I
can't
guess
hear.
if we didn't hear her, we don't have to we can pretend we didn't get the assignment.
Nephilim.
We got that.
Nephilim.
You'll have to go back and listen to this, Molly, and you'll know what we're talking about.
I will. I'm sorry. I'll blame it on Sue's computer or internet or something.
We're just picking on you.
Yeah. Okay, so that, it will be interesting to see what you can find out about that. Just, how many of you ever heard anybody preach on that passage?
Ever.
How
Or at
many-
least I wasn't paying attention if they did.
Okay, Molly, here, go ahead.
That's when I can use those baseball
That's
knobs.
exactly what I was gonna say. Here's your assignment. Come up with a sermon using these baseball nubs off these baseball bats.
In relationship to Nephilim. All right. We got that. Okay, so that's where we'll stop tonight. Then next week we'll get into more familiar territory, but this is a great passage for you to think about and read. How many of you ever remember reading that before or hearing that? No.
I read it, but I don't remember. I think I got confused, figured I don't understand and kept going.
Yeah.
Yep.
Exactly. And we may not be able to figure anything else out other than it was a story of the time, but it would be great to everybody have a little bit of research on that and see what we could bring in on.
Aw, and I'm not gonna be here next week. Aw. I'll have to see what you come up with.
Send your paper in a written paper email.
Single spaced, font 10. pages, right?
You can send it anything you find.
That's
Okay.
okay.
Anybody have any questions or comments?
I do about last week. Not, let me find it. Not a question, but you know, when we're doing Bible studies, the goal is not always just to learn information. I mean, I know you know that, but it is how is it transforming our lives? Right? I mean,
Okay, yeah.
it should be changing. We should be changing. So let me see if I can find it. Oh, and it really struck me because I hadn't thought about this. You know, why didn't God accept Abel's sacrifice?
Cain's.
Cain's
Cain.
sacrifice. Why didn't God? I knew that. Why didn't God accept Cain's sacrifice? And it doesn't matter.
The first,
It doesn't
the
matter.
first question I'm gonna answer, ask in heaven.
Dottie. Well, but what was more important is that our reaction to what God does is more important than what God does. I mean, that was what I came away with. And I've thought about that all week. And I've had some things happen that didn't seem fair. And I've stopped myself from saying, God, that isn't fair. I mean, I've been faithful in this and, you know, whatever else. And he's watching for my reaction. And it's all right to, I mean, I think it's all right to question God, but it's more important. What is my reaction? to God? And am I gonna continue to be faithful even if I don't understand? And who am I to, who am I to say that God isn't fair in something? That's what I came away from last week.
Good,
away.
good. Thanks for sharing. That's the point of Genesis. The whole story of Genesis is not to prove what year or where, but how it affects us and what they were telling the stories to say, okay, and look at it. Here's what happened, and here's our relationship. The story of Genesis is about our relationship with God.
Mm.
Plain and simple. There we are. Good, thanks.
That's not one of the attributes of God, fairness. It isn't mentioned that God is fair.
God is just.
Fair enough.
God is just. But he'll be just to you,
Yeah, that's that.
just.
Mm-hmm.
And justice for each person is different. The explanation that I've seen is the 3 children watching over a fence. And what we see from the front is, 3 heads watching a ball game over a fence. And when you look at it from the back, one of them is standing on the ground, one of them is standing on 1 block, and one of them is standing on 2 blocks. And the justice is that they all get to watch the game, but justice is different for all 3 of them because they aren't all given the same thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
One needed more help than the other and whatever, but they all got what they needed, which was to be able to watch over the fence.
And
Have you
if they're
seen that? Do you
standing
know what I'm
too
talking
close
about?
to it,
What, Dottie?
standing too close to, if they're standing too close to an elephant, they only see part of the elephant, so they describe it as a big tree because they're by his leg, or that
Right.
can't be accurate either.
Yeah, we all don't see God the same way, and God doesn't see us all the same way. God is fair to each of us in the way that we need fairness.
Yeah. You said that better than I did.
Alrighty. Well, you got your homework assignment, Nephilim. Nephilim. Now,
Wait, we heard that.
okay.
Ready, everybody, here we go. Got it.
No, say Nephilim.
Nephilia.
Okay.
My nephilia hurts.
I'll talk to you later after class. Okay. All right. On that note, I am going to shut off the